Man, do you ever talk to somebody and just completely deflate in their presence because you realize you don't know jack shit about shit? One of my former partners used to say, I don't know shit about fuck. That's how I felt talking to Thomas More. Oh man, this was such a privilege, such a blessing, such an awesome opportunity. I told my friends I felt like I had a cheat code in the world, and that is just have a podcast. Just have a podcast, start a podcast, and you can talk to some of the coolest people in the world, man. Thomas More. I originally discovered Thomas More because I read his book, A Religion of One's Own. And that book was so transformative for me, so helpful, and opened my mind up to the ideas of spirituality and personal spirituality's personal health through a personal religion. And God, that was so great. And then years later, stumbled across his book, Care of the Soul, which is so amazing, talking about giving care for an aching, sick soul forever, not trying to cure it, but just being present for the changes in our life as they unfold. Amazing, amazing stuff. Anyways, today we have the wonderful Thomas More. I can't even believe I'm saying that. The wonderful Thomas More with us today. He is, I think, 83 years old, a absolute sage of an old man full of wisdom. If you're watching this, Thomas, thank you so much for joining me on the show. He was a monk formerly, and then spent about 30 years as a psychotherapist, specializing in kind of jungian psychology, and then began writing in 1990 or so. Wrote about 20 books, and one of those being The Care of the Soul, which is one of my all-time favorite spiritual books. And what else? He lectures across the world on spirituality, religion, and therapy, and made the fatal mistake of deciding to join me for an hour and a half of my questions on a podcast. And you get the wonderful privilege of listening to that. So without further ado, here is my wonderful conversation with a wonderfully, beautifully wise soul, Thomas More. I have to tell you, your work has helped me tremendously.
Oh, I'm so glad.
I read the book A Religion of One's Own when I would say probably 7 years ago. And what I gained from it was the curiosity, being raised very religious from a, black and white, what's the truth, what's not the truth. Not so much a fire and brimstone kind of salvation, but in some regard, yeah. I was struggling with the way that the religion had fit me, and some of the difficulties that over-identifying with this super moral and washed white as snow person was causing me to develop some of these suppressed personality traits in the way they were manifesting in my life. And my therapist recommended your book, and reading A Religion of One's Own cracked my brain open. It really did. I thought, okay, what's this guy talking about here? What's this guy talking about here? It's like there's this function of religious practice. It's like there's this deeper, more like the healthy application of religion, like a health, like a well-being that can be derived from religious practices, and that maybe people are getting too caught up in which one to follow, which one is right, which one is the right one, as opposed to using them as inspirations, cooking with a little bit of this one and tasting a little bit of this one, and letting that process be aimed at entirely spiritual well-being. I have a background in fitness, and so the analogy that came up for me during that process was that it would be ridiculous for me as a person with a certain experience in fitness, with certain biases of my favorite ways to get in shape, to point the finger at someone else who's in shape by a different method and say that's wrong.
Yeah, makes no sense.
Yeah. So thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that book.
I loved writing that book, and I think I wrote about four versions of it. I was cleaning out our storage room the other day, and I was trying to take books out, and I found four complete manuscripts on that same theme that I didn't publish. So I
Hmm.
worked hard trying to get around to making that book the way I wanted it to be.
What was the hardest aspect of it? What were you wrestling with to get right?
There was so much to say, and I didn't want a 700-page book. So, so whittling it down to the essentials was the most difficult thing.
Hmm.
Also, the other thing about substance is that I'm aware that people are all in different places in regard to religion. So there are people who are members of established religions who I think are doing pretty well. My mother and dad were good Catholics all their lives, and I think they benefited greatly, and they handled it extremely well. I wouldn't want them to do it any differently.
Hmm.
On the other hand, there are many people that I meet that are searchers, looking for an answer, looking for a home. And I
Hmm.
wanted to speak to those people very much. And I
Okay.
realized when I was writing it that I used to be a searcher and a hunter like that, but I'm no longer that. And
What do you
so
mean?
I wanted to write to the people who are in that place too.
Help them bridge the gap.
And also people who are not interested, who are consider themselves agnostic or atheist. I always say that I have agnosticism and atheism in me.
Hmm.
Not totally, but it's there. I have a dose
Yeah.
of each. So I wanted to address everyone in a way that they would feel at home with me. And I think that's what took me a while, a few
Yeah.
tries before I got it.
I was listening to that book during a time where I was kind of in atheism and had gotten rid of God as the answer and as the holder of my salvation. And for me that felt a little it felt freeing to rid myself of my, the religion that was kind of a hand-me-down set of morals and rituals. But it also felt a little cold, you know. It didn't
Yeah.
have the there was a wonderful aspect in that book that, and even in the book The Care of the Soul that I read a couple of years after that, that that really touched me and inspires me to this day as a way that I approach the moments in my life, trying to be soulful and attend to the moments that pass in my life with the same sincerity that you do religious ritual.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about that, about imbuing the passing moments with sincere soul and with connecting to the divine in daily life?
I can. I remember that it's my own, I'm speaking for myself then. Uh, and I have a kind of, I've devoted myself to these questions all my life.
Hmm.
I didn't do it intentionally, but it just happened that way. And I almost accidentally got a PhD in religious studies, which shocked me because I was not interested in religion at the time. So my current state that way is that I am very much influenced by many spiritual traditions that don't want you to even use the name God.
Hmm.
Like Zen Buddhism, for example, there's no God talk there.
Hmm.
And the Tao Te Ching, which is a big source of my spiritual way, says that you should not speak of which it shouldn't be spoken, and I feel that way about it. So I give a talk titled "I rarely use the name God," or "I rarely use the word God," and it's true. I rarely use the word, because I think the word God is, the purpose of it is to break up any ideas we have about God.
Hmm.
It's the word God should be used kind of as a kind of a cleanser, kind of a something you use to clean up your ideas so you keep it open.
Hmm.
I think God has to do with living on the edge of your existence, where you don't know really what it's all about. You don't know where you're headed. I think that's the human condition, and it's not a bad place. I think it's a very good place. And as far as I'm concerned, anything less than that, where you have to create something, something more formal and more rigid, is a defense against life. It's a way
Hmm.
of escaping life. And so that's my point of view, that I want to keep religion in the deep sense of that word, existential sense of the word, not institution. But I don't want to keep the word God in a way that will keep me away from the edge. I
Hmm.
want to be there where I don't know what's next. I want to be standing on the edge. It's like the tarot card where the fool stands on the mountain and it just looks like he's just about ready to fall over. I think
Hmm.
that's a good place to be.
Yeah. Are you saying that God, for in your mind, using God as a kind of like a boxed up, taped and closed? I know that well. I got God right here, and that's not really the way that works best for you, but instead, that
No.
thrusts you into the curiosity and wonder of the experience of life.
Yes. And I don't mean to say that everyone should be like that. I really don't. I
Sure.
think there
Yeah.
are many options, many options.
Just
So
Thomas.
that's just me. That's just me.
I really wanted to spend a little bit of time specifically for our listeners talking about a concept that has impacted me so wonderfully from your book, The Care of the Soul. And the theme that resonates throughout the entire book is cure versus care. When I told a friend of mine this morning that I had a conversation set for 9 o'clock, I shared with him the care of the soul and told him that the wonderful thing about it was, and forgive me if this is incorrect, but the origin of the word psychotherapy and the Greek psyche and therapos is something like the soul, and therapos being care, but in the sense of like caring for someone who's terminally ill, in the sense that you're showing up and attending to the needs, not really with the idea that you're going to get them on the other side without sickness.
Right.
And how starkly different that idea of nursing and caring for a soul as it shows up in life, how starkly different that is from psychotherapy the way we understand it today, which is cure me so I can get on with it.
That's right. Yes, absolutely. That's at the beginning of Care of the Soul. And I thought of writing that book. First of all, I realized I was aware that the word psychotherapy does, from its Greek roots, are exactly care, soul, care of the soul. So I thought maybe I thought really in a very extravagant way that care of the soul could replace the idea of therapy as we know it. Uh, in psychology, too, psychology has those similar roots. Psyche is there, soul, and the logos, psychology is psyche and logos. And logos really means mystery, the mystery. So if I do psychology, I'm talking about the mystery of the soul.
What was the logos? Sorry, I was making a quick note when you said that.
Logos means mystery. I mean, that's not to explain logos. It would take quite a while. It's a big
Sure.
word,
Yeah, let's.
but it means a lot of things. But it essentially, as I look at it, it means maybe a mysterious understanding of things, like understanding the mystery of the psyche would be a definition of psychology from its roots. So it's
Understanding
all
the
about
mystery of understanding the mystery of the psyche.
of the
It's an
psyche.
in itself is somewhat of an oxymoron, but it settles in your soul quite well.
That's right. That's right. You can't understand it, but you don't so that's why it's not a good. What I just said is probably not accurate to say you can't understand the mystery. It
Hmm.
means, but there is a kind of logos means that the world makes sense, that there's some order in the world. That's one meaning of the word logos. And another meaning for it is that we have in ourselves the capacity to grasp that order that's out
Hmm.
there.
To
That's the
understand it.
traditionalist, but that word's been used that way for at least 2 or 3 thousand
Hmm.
years.
Hmm.
So, so this is profound stuff. We talk about psychotherapy and psychology. These are profound ideas, but we have reduced them to kind of academic disciplines and
Hmm.
methods, and it's
Yeah,
much more than that.
it strips the way that I've learned psychotherapy growing up in America, along with our medical system. It does strip the wonder, the curiosity out of the process of being healthy, and the obsession that we have with feeling better. It makes us skip the reality of the pain we feel and the message that it carries. Something that sticks with me from your work that's helped me so much is the space and the acceptance of emotions and experiences, not as something to be fixed. Depression, may not be something to be fixed as much as it is a part of your experience that could be welcomed, sat with, and experienced deeply. And it's interesting to me how there's a different level of responding to that appearance of a negative, emotion. As you can either fix it and suppress it, take an antidepressant. You could drink some extra coffee, go out for drinks a little more often than you ought to, and you could dull that pain, or you can allow it to show up in its entirety and maybe not heal it, but understand the origin of that darker emotion. And just because of that, maybe at that point that is the caring of the soul. That's not that you're not depressed anymore, but I understand it on a deeper level, which makes me oddly feel a lot better.
Yes, one of the big issues, themes that I learned from my friend James Selman, who was a wonderful psychologist, um, is that there are a lot of things going on in the psyche at the same time. He called it psychological polytheism,
Hmm.
referring to the Greek mythology where each of the gods and goddesses has a certain part of life that they empower. And so that's an interesting thought in regard to what you're saying, though, because I think it's possible to try to listen to your symptom, if it's depression or jealousy or
Hmm.
uh, I don't know, whatever it is,
Anger.
anger. Yeah, that could be anger. A lot of these things we have to deal with. At the same time, we could listen to it and really hold it and see what it wants from us. I think it's a good question. What does this pain want from us?
Wonderful question.
Some change or some understanding or something it wants from us. At
Do
the
you think
same
that?
time, at the same time, we can want it to go away. That's what I'm saying. It's polytheistic. You can want it to go away, and you don't have to resolve that. You don't have to choose one or the other. You can live both.
Do you think that some? Do you think it's possible that, depression might want you to make some shifts in your life? Maybe that's what it wants. Do you think it ever just wants to be noticed, just
Yes.
seen?
Well, I think depression is something that for most people is probably most people is one of the many moods that we can get into. then there are reasons for being depressed. Many of my friends today, and myself too, are depressed over what's happening in world politics, national politics, and in the world.
Hmm.
Wars that we have now that feel so discouraged that we're still doing that kind of thing and still having to deal with it,
Yeah.
and still have these leaders that don't have any humanity in them, and we still have that, and it's discouraging and depressing for a lot of people. On the other hand, some people are depressed, and they don't know why. They just feel depressed. Others have a like an illness of depression.
Yeah.
It's really something that has got a hold of them, and it may take years for them to work it through.
Hmm.
But I say work it through. The way I would work it through is to listen to it, hold it, and not just have an intention of trying to cure it. That's what I'm talking about, polytheism. You say, I need to experience this. At the very same time, I wish it would go away.
I think about a child crying in the back seat, and you going, I wish I could get rid of this. If it was your child, you wouldn't want to just stop at the next stoplight and throw it out. You, it's important to get to have it, to hold it, to nourish it, and at the very least, just be there.
That's certainly true. So yes, you want to hold that, and maybe that's a good example. I don't know
Hmm.
of having something, yeah, something in your sphere, in your world, in
Yeah.
yourself that is very difficult, and you would like to get rid of it, but at the same time, you realize this is natural. It's part of the ups and downs of life, and I can't just keep getting rid of everything.
Yeah. Is that the beginning of maturity, of spirituality? What is it that once someone makes that decision in their mind that, okay, you know what, I'm not going to get rid of the things that are painful and difficult. I'm going to create more space so that they can come up. What process does that begin for someone on a psychological, spiritual, soulful?
Well, there are probably several processes. One that comes to my mind, it's a bit complicated. I'll start by saying that one of the things that people have to do in life is to separate from their family of origin, from their early childhood. They have to make a separation so they don't keep living with those same infantile understandings of things. There's a lot
Mm.
of child thinking going on, and that is not useful. We have to be adults, so that's one thing. But there's something similar where we live in a society that creates a mythology for us. It creates a story, a narrative that we all live unconsciously. We don't think much about it, but we live it. Like modern life, we live. And part of the modern mythology is if you're having any pain, get something to take to get rid of it. If it can be compressed into a pill, that's like having a mythology pill. It's like you get, instead of separating from the narrative that you're living, that's quite woven into our culture and therefore quite unconscious as we participate in it. We look for something to get rid of just the sensation of not being happy living that myth.
Mm.
So I think there's a separation needed both from our family background and from the culture in which we live. Not entirely, and not like a complete, yeah, not a complete denial of it or separation, but maybe uh, when I was used to be a monk, we used to say as a monk you have to resist the world. They call it contemptus mundi, which means resistance to the world.
Mm.
We're in this community of monks now because we want to be in the world, but we also want to resist being totally absorbed by it. We
Is
want to try a different life.
do you say that that starts the process of individualization from your family or your culture
Yeah,
because you're able to feel the soul's response to some of the institutions or some
yeah,
of the dogmatic, some of the things that are handed to you heavily? If you allow yourself to feel the pain that is a response to that, then you can begin to create change in your own world. And if you don't, if you're not willing to feel the pain of it, then you're not able to connect with where you're truly being hurt.
yes, that's certainly true. That it's one way. I think there are other ways, but one way of separating is to feel the discomfort and pain and
Mm,
disorientation, a lot of things that we feel that aren't
mm,
working. We don't usually blame the society. We usually blame ourselves or most likely blame our parents. But I think the society is largely at fault, which means that we have to have a relation to our culture that is complex, where we accept some things and don't accept others. And I think I've always said this when I first published Care of the Soul, that we have to be eccentric. We have to not fit into anything.
what does that
Because
word mean?
in order to keep your individuality, you need a certain level of eccentricity.
What does eccentric mean?
It means that you don't fit in to everyone else's idea of how to live. You're odd. You're an
And it
oddball.
and it's important that that eccentricity is a result of the soul inhabiting you spontaneously,
Yes.
not as a character that you dreamed up and
No.
decided to play.
No. No. I think that the eccentricity I'm talking about is the kind that evolves when you have lived with a soulful life, which means you let this deeper source of your life affect you and that you stay close in touch with it. And you take your chances as you live. You don't try to live safely all the time, but you know that sometimes you have to step out and be different from the crowd.
Yeah,
And
and
that's
express.
kind of a beginning of eccentricity.
I like. I would like to shed light on the idea that largely is influenced by the work you've done. That is your dissatisfaction with life may be from an aching, neglected soul, and your fantasies about the future, maybe even salvation if it's in religion, or your fantasies of a better world, relationship, job, etc., that'll wash you clean of all your unsatisfaction, may be perpetuating the lack of care you bring to your soul. What do
Yes.
you what kind of things can you talk to our listener about within that domain?
Well, I think you do have to. Think you have to pay attention to yourself. There's one thing I always say about when I give talks on aging. I wrote a book on aging a few years ago, and I think one part of aging is that you go through. I mean, aging. I don't mean growing old necessarily, but aging, becoming a more mature person. So people age very young. We age when we're teens, and when we're preteens even. And we age throughout our lives. I think we age when we have experiences that we take on and they transform us a little at a time. And if you avoid those moments of transformation, that's like avoiding the soul process. I mean, that's the way I think this idea of progressing in stages like that and through events is more of a soul kind of aging. The other kind is linear, where you're aging every day and it's just unconscious. I think what happens, like, let's say um, you graduate from high school, and now suddenly you're in a whole different kind of life. You're either going to go to a university or college, or you're going to get a job, probably, um, and maybe find a mate. That's big deal. That's very different from being in high school,
Yeah.
and that is a rite of passage. It's a in between moment, and you have to get through that. And it can be very challenging, and it can make you feel anxious and many things. Well, if you could go through that experience and really feel what's happening to you and be guided by your emotions and by events,
Mm.
I think that that would be the development of a soulful life. So to me, creating a soulful life is like really good aging. And that
Mm.
has to do with partly with going through these passages that come to us. And there's some big ones and there are some minor ones.
You have you have to allow that process to move on and be a part of it, and
And
instead of trying to cling to a branch in the river and saying no.
I think a lot of people, you're right, cling to the branch as a way of trying to stay still instead of flowing downstream. You know,
Mm.
they want to stay where they are. And I know I've been in that place where I'm hoping to stay where I am and not move further. But it's tempting to try to stay fixed. But that is not the way of the soul. The way of the soul is to move through passages.
Mm. Do you believe in reincarnation?
I don't believe in anything really.
Really? That process of moving through life's lessons, to me, encourages me to believe in reincarnation, at least as a concept. Not like I would bet my money on it, but
Yeah, right.
just it seems to be helpful to frame the painful developments in life as like you're trying to learn lessons. You're not trying to maximize the amount of reward that you get from this quick experience.
Yeah, I can see that. I don't mean to be too critical when I said that. What I mean is that there's certain words that don't work for me anymore very well. One of them is belief. There have
Hmm.
been some good books written about trying to get beyond belief because that it doesn't make too much difference what you believe. You know, it's kind of like you say, it's like putting your money on something, really. And
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
and I don't see the value in just doing that. I
Yeah.
also don't see much value in the word truth. I never use that. That's another word you won't find
Mm.
in my work.
Mm.
Very rarely I use it in a different sense, not a very strict sense.
Yeah.
But so I avoid those kind of words and instead would rather say, uh, talk about insight and values and things like that. So when it comes to reincarnation, you're talking about facing death and afterlife. And I think the religions offer many different solutions, and I like to accept all of them. Like, I think reincarnation is very interesting, and I've been moved by it, and I can sit with it for a while comfortably. I also think heaven is a really good idea. That's where I grew up in my childhood, and
Mm.
I like that idea of heaven a lot. I think it's a good solution. And so I know it's full of both of these things, I think, are full of illusion, but I
Mm.
think that they also offer something. So what I do is I accept almost all, including the atheistic one. There's nothing to expect. I accept all those because I think they all give us something, but ultimately beneath it all, it's unknown. So I'd rather live with the unknown.
For so many people, it's about finding out what to put their money on because they're scared shitless about what's going to happen when they do meet the Grim Reaper. For you,
So I
what?
think if you live a soulful life and you are risking as you go, and you let things fall apart, fall away, that's a kind of dying.
Yeah.
You're doing it all your life, and I think when you come to the end of your life, and I'm speaking as I'm 83. I have these thoughts, um, so uh, I think when you get to that point, you might be more comfortable. I
Mm.
feel pretty comfortable. I'm not saying that I'm totally happy with this whole arrangement. I don't like the arrangement about death at all.
Oh, that's funny, man. The fear of death. Do you see that as the fear of death diminishes, your ability to stay in a state of wonderment and curiosity about the nature of life grows?
Yes, and also a willingness to let it all happen. Lately, I have been interested in the new physics that's developing out of this big telescope they put up in the space. It's challenging ideas about time and about the cosmology, the way our world is put together, about how it began. It's all been changed, and people are
Mm,
wondering, what to do with it. To me,
mm.
that's a good occasion to reassess the idea of afterlife.
Yeah.
Because part of our ideas of afterlife in the past have been based on the old physics. It's not that I think we should let science tell us what's happening. I don't, but it does. It is a factor, and I find it kind of interesting as I now contemplate afterlife.
Mm. I want to bring up a couple more things about the book, The Care of the Soul, and some of the things that I derive from it. Do you think that, in some regard, accepting your pain as a constant in life is is vitally important to working with it, trying not to get rid of it?
It depends really what you mean by accepting. If it is giving in, probably not. I think like I said, keep saying we have to do many things at the same time. And one of the things you do is try to hold your pain and try to learn from it and see what it's all about. And the other thing you do is try not to suffer it too much and not be a victim of it.
Mm.
So it's tricky business. And a
Yeah.
lot of times people, I think, make a mistake of trying to choose one over the other of all those options. You have to
Mm.
hold everything yourself at the same time.
Mm.
So I think that it's possible to uh, it's well it's possible to become masochistic about yourself. Masochism means that you find some delight in suffering,
Mm.
and some people, it's a very interesting thing that actually people do sometimes enjoy suffering.
Mm.
And they look for it. An example, I'll give you an example. Someone who's very jealous, what do? They look for evidence that they've been betrayed so they can feel worse.
Oh yeah,
Really,
bring it on.
I say I've been through that. So, so I think that's an example, but I think we do it in many other ways. So you have to be careful of that. It's very possible to become masochistic. You have to watch
Mm.
out for it so that you don't become a victim and you don't suffer too much. You have your
It,
natural suffering, and then you have your suffering from thinking about it.
yeah. Is there in some way, is what I sense and today's culture is like we were talking about earlier, the want to escape the pain, the want to cure it and to get on with life, and what we're really doing is perpetuating the aching soul inside by neglecting it and separating ourselves from it and saying that's not me, that's this thing that's tormenting me or whatnot. Are we in some shadow sense, unconscious way, deeply masochistic and want to just continue suffering instead of facing it head on?
Yes, I think so. I think you're right there. There's a lot of masochism around, a lot of willingness to suffer rather than to live differently, for example.
Hmm.
And I find, I don't know if I can generalize here, but I find that when you allow the suffering in your life that comes along, there are really exceptions to this, but when you can give it its place and not just become crazy trying to run away from it, there's a kind of joy and happiness that can come through that. When I say that, I'm reminded now of some really good books written maybe 20 years ago by very intelligent people who had cancer and wrote books about their cancer. And in dealing with their cancer, really taking it on, they they found humor. They found a very positive outlook on life, I had a very good friend who was like that. He was a writer in Ireland, John Moriarty. I consider one of the best writers that Ireland's produced. And John is wonderful, wonderful guy, and a close friend of mine. And when he first discovered he had cancer, he went on the radio over there in Ireland in those days. I think still people listen to the radio a lot. He went onto the radio and told people how horrible it was and he was just howling in his dismay of having this cancer. And it surprised me because he was such a good spiritual teacher and philosopher all his life. But then I went to visit him toward the end of his life, and he had got through it. And he and I laughed and had a great time, and he was very peaceful. And I talked to him just 2 weeks before he died. And I felt I learned something from him that it may take a while to reach the point where you can accept your suffering, in that sense of accepting, and then find joy and
Yeah.
release.
Well, the thing I wrote down as you were talking is acceptance of pain produces joy.
Yeah.
Something like that. Is that alchemy?
In a way, it is. Yes, it's a transformation of the pain into something else, something better. And that would be transformation is alchemical. In other words, that whole process could be described alchemically. Yeah.
One of the themes that comes up in the book so much for me that's caused so much opening and expanding and healing in my heart and has allowed the experience of life to become so much richer has been the idea of patience, dealing with my soul. And that's such a difference. One of the difficult things I think that people probably have, I could speak for myself, one of the difficult things that I had a hard time with wrestling with your work is the lack of control that comes up, because I can fix stuff. I can just tell me what I need to fix and I'll fix it. But when your soul just says, I'm just hurting, and I just want to be seen, I just want to be felt, I just want the space to express my feelings, and then we can get to solutions in 3 years, then that it's like it's a shift, it's a different gear altogether. And I really want to encourage the listeners to consider the way they deal with their pain and see if patience is something that they could integrate. That seems to be something that I feel so much from the book, The Care of the Soul.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, you don't have to rush to fix anything. Nothing really needs to be fixed. And as a therapist, I have a lot of people coming to me over the years. And my job, I felt, was to be with them actively with their suffering, but not have the attitude of fixing it and getting to the end of it, but rather to stay with it and see what it would offer. That's the thing. The illness can offer something.
Yeah.
So we always say, following Hillman again, I say my community of group following him would say, stay close to the symptom. Don't try to rush into the solution. Stay close to the symptom and try to listen to the symptom itself and see what it's trying to offer to you. So, for example, if I go back to the symptom of jealousy, which seems to be really terrible. People, it's a terrible pain when you're really jealous. And it just lasts, no matter what you do, it hangs on. I think it hangs on because it's trying to do something to you. It's trying to teach you how to be in relationship, for one thing. Trying to teach you that you have to really be vulnerable to the other person. You can't expect them to be doing what you want. Like you don't want them to see some other person. Well, too bad, I mean, what you want there is not the point. You have to be able to be with somebody where you're not controlling them so much. Yes, you can ask for limitation, but that's very different from jealous people. Usually they become dictators.
Yes.
They really. So
Instead of
that
what? Sorry to interrupt you, but instead of what? Instead of doing what with the jealousy?
instead of being both firm and vulnerable, that's the solution, to do both. To be firm with what you want and what you can handle, and vulnerable to letting the other person live their own life, that they are a free
Mm,
person and they have to make their choices. You don't know what they need in their life. They may
yeah,
need something that doesn't fit your plans. Well, that's just the way it is.
yeah.
And you have to learn about that. And I think jealousy is the way you learn.
This touches something that I had noted down when reading your book, that you mentioned that you like to take sometimes things. Well, as a therapist, people bring you things. They say, "Get rid of this. Get rid of the alcoholism, the depression. Get rid of my anger, my jealousy." And one thing you said, I don't have the exact quotation for it, but something to the likings of, I like to make a practice of taking the thing that they've rejected and giving it back to them in a way that reminds them of the necessity and usefulness of that particular trait. That's really cool.
Yes, and you can do that with everything.
Hmm.
Even that, what you'd probably come up with some things you think, well, you can't do that with everything, but I think you can. You
Hmm.
have to use your imagination though, and be able to see what's going on more subtly. Let's take
Yeah.
another example. Someone is eating too much. You know, they're trying to deal with their eating problem, the food problem, and the only way to do that I can see is to take the eating more metaphorically, more poetically, and
Hmm.
to see that eating too much is trying to tell you that, not that you should stop eating and not go through all these diets and everything that will get you to eat less, but rather in some ways to eat more. And that would mean, but you don't eat literally. It means
Hmm.
that you have maybe a more appetite for life, and that you
Yeah.
take on more life, you know, chew on life more, eat it, take it into you. So what you do then is this, taking the symptom on and going into it, is that you take it less literally. You don't,
Hmm.
because when it's totally symptomatic and causing you pain, it is literal. It's an
Yeah.
acting out. And what the solution is to be more imaginative. And that's what I think the role of the therapist is, to be the kind of the spokesperson for imagination, for
And that,
being
is
able.
that? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, no, please.
Is that because the thing you're experiencing is a symptom of something deeper? It's just where it decided to poke its finger out and express itself in your life through an eating disorder. And in fact, it's an expression of your lack of getting what you need, your lack of nourishment, and this is just the little funny way it manifests.
Yes, I don't mean to say that these metaphors are that easy. They're not. I mean, that's what I mean. You take a long time to, and I do a lot of dream work because the dreams help transform ordinary life experiences into metaphor.
Hmm.
And so we pay attention to the dreams to help us see what's really happening and help us develop the proper metaphor for what's happening here and whatever's going on. It's not easy. You don't just get a snap decision of what the poetry of your symptom is. It takes a while to find it, and it may be very layered. So some of it may have to do with your childhood, and some of it may have to do with some of the fears you have about living in life and so on. So
Yeah.
there are layers. But I think you take the symptom and see that it's a kind of poetry that
Hmm.
tells you what you need, but it's telling you in disguise, sort of as an image, as a story or a painting, something like that.
Hmm. If you don't mind, I'd like to take a 60-second break, use the restroom real quick, and then I would love to return and talk about dreams a little bit.
Sure. Sure,
Thanks.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's hard to have a good talk when you got to pee.
Oh, I know. I know. I know.
Dreams. I have in the last few months started to pay more attention to my dreams, and part of my self-reflection and open up my mind and heart to the themes and the dreams. And that's something that's been helpful to me. Has been, I used to write down my dreams, and now I write down how I felt in the dreams, which has been a cool layering shift of sorts. It's new for me though. I'm just beginning this practice the last couple months of doing it when I have a dream that strikes me as significant, writing down what it made me feel or what it reminded me of. And that's interesting. Recently, I'm in a relationship. I have a girlfriend I've been with for about 2.5 years. And this is the most committed and present and deep I've been in a relationship ever. And part of me often longs to run fast as hell out of this thing and looks back at previous relationships and with rose-colored glasses and says, oh, this was much more desirable than this. Compare apples to oranges and that kind of thing. And there was a particular past relationship that had been mulling around in my mind a little bit that had become my object of desire for a few weeks of just kind of mental escape. And then I had a dream about that relationship, and it was just me sitting across from that former partner, and I was just looking at them, and then I felt this dagger of right into my heart. And it was this familiar pain that I hadn't felt since we had been together, which was her ongoing, sharp, angry attacks that she would thrust at me like arrows. And I woke up from that dream feeling grateful for a reminder of the full picture. And I wrote that down for the reminder of the pain that relationship did come with, and that it felt like it allowed me to return my focus to the here and now and to balance back out. Dreams can be an interesting part of our personal discovery, and paying attention to the soul is what I pick up from your work. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. With dreams, using dreams to help us get through life they've been around probably since the beginning of humanity. We know, like in the old ancient days before Christ, the Greeks had these temples where people could go to be healed, and they stayed overnight to have a dream. And we have records of the dreams that they left behind. So, in some cases. So it's not a new idea, it's not new, but it's something we can do. We know we can do. The question is, how do you do it? What do you do with your dreams? I would say with the dream that you just described, like let's say you came to me with your dream, and
Yes.
you told me that your reading of the dream, what you just said about the dream. I think what I would do is say that's really helpful then. That dream was able to give you some guidance at a moment when you felt you needed it, and that makes a lot of sense. However, I would say that the poetry of a dream, the metaphors there, are vast and profound, and whenever you come up with a reading of it, you have to be open to another one too.
Okay.
You have to be able to look at many other ways of looking at the dream. And the advantage of, in the case of therapy, to have a good therapist who knows dreams, knows how to deal with dreams, they can give you a point of view that you wouldn't have. I think most people I know say that they find it hard to interpret their own dreams, that it's better to have somebody else have a different point of view and see things that they can't see. So there's that side of it. But I think it's a very good idea to have your dream and write down your feeling in the dream and how you woke up from the dream, what your attitude was and feeling when you woke up from it, about it, and any ideas you have about it. I always tell my clients that what I do is I write my dream down and then I put a line under it, and everything under the line are my later reflections on the dream, maybe what I think it means or my associations with it, or how I felt with it, something like that. And I suggest that they might do something similar. Most of them don't pay any attention to that, but they have their own way. Everyone has their own way of dealing with it. So like there's one client I have. I'm sure he wouldn't mind if I say it. That whenever he presents a dream, he gives it a title, and I
Hmm.
find that titling the dream is really helpful to us because it brings out what he thinks is the essence of the dream without going on and on explaining it. It's very nice. I love it. He's the only client I've ever had who does that, puts a
Hmm.
title on a dream, but it's a nice way. And it was not my idea at all. He just did that.
Yeah.
So there are many ways of working with dreams. I wouldn't want to be dogmatic about it, but I do think that you can get better at it over time, both
Hmm.
with your own dreams and help. It really helps to work with other people's dreams too, because when you're looking at their dreams, like let's say your friends, somebody, if you can have that kind of relationship where you can share a dream,
Hmm.
that can help you because then you don't have the added problem of having your own stuff in the way.
Yeah, that's right. You get a better picture of it. My grandmother has tremendous dreams. The most craziest dreams ever. And she was telling my family about it one time. We were sitting at a family lunch, and my dad said, "Well, what'd you dream last night?" And she said, "The craziest thing. I was sitting there on the couch with a cardboard box full of cell phones, and I was eating them." And my dad said, "I can tell you what that meant." She said, "Yeah, what?" And he goes, "You're starving for communication."
That's not bad. That's not
not a
bad.
not a bad interpretation.
Oh, no, that's good. I like it.
I want to be respectful of your time. I know we've been at this for an hour. I just have one more question,
Oh,
if
please,
you
that's
wouldn't
fine.
mind.
That's fine. Yeah.
Something that really intrigues me, but full disclosure, I don't know much about. Although I probably talk to my friends as if I do. Is Greek mythology and
Mhm.
what that's all about. From my understanding of Greek mythology, is that the gods represent aspects of human emotion, and the fact their gods are immortal is because the emotions that we experience just pervade time and story, and we can see those parts of ourself reflected in the stories of Greek mythology. Am I in the right ballpark here?
Not for me. I'm sorry.
Okay, please. I'd love to hear how you look at this.
No, I don't. There is that going on in psychology these days, the things that dream show us parts of ourselves. I think that's too much of the self, you know.
You're
The
saying Greek
Greeks,
mythology does? You said dreams. I
no,
just want to
no,
make sure you.
the way we talk that way, psychology does that. No, I don't think that's probably the best way because actually, the Greek gods and goddesses were religion. They were part of a religion.
Hmm.
And so we call it mythology. It'd be the same as talking about Christian mythology. It's probably true that's what it is, similar to the Greeks, but Christians would not be happy hearing their religion called a mythology, probably,
Hmm.
because we have bad associations. I don't have those negative associations. I think is a collection of stories that tell about the great powers in life, uh, the great themes in human life, not
Hmm.
just individuals, but in human life in general.
Hmm.
So they're very big. A lot of big things happen, and they're gods. And the people believed in these gods. They had temples to them, and they had priests and priestesses to them. We have a hard time seeing that because we can't imagine a polytheistic religion, probably, with many gods and goddesses, because we think God is God. But I
And the
feel that
Greeks.
it's the same, that their religion was the same as a contemporary Jewish, Islamic, or Christian religion.
So the
So,
Greeks believed in these gods the same way that lots of people believe in Jesus.
yes,
And so there was the god of war, the god of sex, the
yes,
god of love.
yes.
And so
And
their
so,
relationship with them was in like an honor respect thing, like you should pray to the god of
yes,
war if you want to win the war.
yes, yes, exactly. So that's what I'm saying. The
Mm.
Greek if you told the Greek the gods were a part of yourself, they think this was nuts. You know, you have a temple for a part of yourself. I don't think so. We
Yeah.
pray to gods who are outside of us. Now, you don't
Mm.
have to say, they're literal, like you're going to see them on the mountain, but they have a presence in this world, It's what you experience maybe in anger and aggression and warfare.
Yeah.
You experience the god Mars, or Ares in the Greeks. You experience that god. It's not
Hmm.
experience him like a person with a body, it's experiencing the reality of aggression and war. We can't say exactly what that is. We use a lot of words for it, but then we use the image of a God to show
Yeah.
that it's not human, that it's something that is in life and that we have to deal with, and that we can pray to it in a way, even, or we can
Hmm.
honor it as outside ourselves. We can make a temple to it. That's
Hmm.
not such an odd thing to do.
Hmm.
So,
How would you make a temple to the god of love or the god of anger? And how what would that do for the person crafting the temple?
well, they didn't. What they would do mainly was create the temple as a way of honoring. So you'd have a temple that would have usually have a space where you could go, like a temenos, they would call it, a sacred space. A
Hmm.
sacred space. This is a sacred space. And they'd have columns around so that when you go through these columns, you're in a sacred space and you'd feel it. You understand that there's something here about love that is not just human, it's like part of life. It's a
Hmm.
reality in itself to some extent that we participate.
Okay. It's part, and that's the godly nature of the gods in Greek mythology. Is it's a real, tangible aspect of life that whether you're here
Yeah,
or not, it exists. And so even though we kind of like maybe antennas pick up on the frequency of love or anger as humans, it
yeah.
exists even as a part of nature without you. And so we honor that God, that deity, that our mind, our personification, or what have you, of that influence that does exist.
Couldn't you say in the example you gave before from your own experience that life has brought this love into you that is different from anything you've experienced before? And couldn't you say, I really am grateful to life for doing that. But instead of saying life, you might say, well, life has this aspect, and there's a
Hmm.
beneficence in life that will give love to people like this. Like you can't just go out and find it. It's like it's a gift in some way. So
Hmm.
it wouldn't be a big step to say, I wonder what that. It's this aspect of life. I'm gonna go and carve a sculpture that will express what this is because I don't know how to talk about it. I'll make a
Hmm.
sculpture of it and kind of personify it. We
Interesting.
often personify things that come to us like that. So
Yeah.
once you've done that, you've got a mythology and you've got a goddess, maybe.
Yeah.
So so it's not crazy to think that people would be able to over centuries be able to develop this very elaborate uh, religion that honors these powers in life.
Hmm.
And that's not too different from a God who also a one God monotheism, where the God gives us a life. You might say, God has given me this, my companion. It's God given, so
What
not too different.
wasn't there then moving from maybe the Greeks being polytheistic in that sense, the god of war, the god of sex, the god of love, family, etc., which we read about in Greek mythology. Was there a what happened? Why was there a movement to now like the monotheistic religion of Christianity where there's one God of all gods, King of all kings? It's one God, not God of all the different elements of life, but the God of all life, which is that. Like what happened there?
Who knows? No, I don't think anyone knows what happened. There is within human beings, there is a desire for freedom, let's say, a lot of freedom to live your life. And there's also a feeling that you have to follow the rules. That's how to live a good life, to follow the rules. And monotheism tends to be a rule kind of religion. I mean, I understand there's a lot of love and many other things, but it tends to focus more on a rule and morals.
Yeah.
And the Greeks, the early Christian theologians kept saying that the Greeks were immoral. That's what they
Hmm.
complained about them, that their polytheism, their gods were immoral because they were sexual. So
You
there
said
was something.
the early who complained that who was immoral and sexual?
The early Christian theologians, the people they call the church fathers,
Hmm.
I mean, Clement of Alexandria was one of them. When you read I've read his stuff. When you read what he writes, he's foaming at the mouth. He's so upset about the Greek uh,
Hmm.
immorality, mainly sexual.
Hmm.
So a lot has to do with sex. Uh, it has a lot to do with that. So how do you deal with your sexual feelings and eros in life? How do you deal with it? The Greeks
Hmm.
dealt with it by having all the gods have a sex life of some kind in
Hmm.
their own way. And the monotheistic religions tend to deal with it by not having any sexuality in divinity at all. And I think that, that can have some negative impacts on the
Yeah.
monotheists.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying there's one or the other. I think there's beauty in both approaches, but you can see there are two different ways of being in this world, and I think we see it. This is speaking very simplistically, but you can
Yeah.
see that it's that it can lead to two very different approaches to our facing reality and facing the the um, things that we have to deal with in our lives, like sex and like warfare and anger and conflict and so many of the other things that are manifested in the gods and goddesses.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
That's a different.
do you see what I mean by I can't say these are parts of ourselves.
Yes, I see what you mean that they exist outside of you. They're a part of
Yeah,
the human. They're a part of life itself, which you're
part of life.
perceiving, and
That's
and yeah, it's not that you made it. You didn't make the god of anger. You just personified it.
right. Yeah, right. You have your own version of it.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's a very good question. Nobody's ever asked me that one before, and I'm very happy to talk about it because it's essential.
Is sorry.
No, no.
So because the way I kind of relate to your work, specifically the care of the soul, is you can gain awareness of the expressions of the soul very subtly, almost in its reflection back to you in your life. Like there's a scripture verse in the Bible that says, "As water reflects a man's face, so his life reflects his heart." And so you think all day, you think, but the deeper, larger dynamics and themes in your life are reflected back to you. That's how you become aware of those things. Mythology, Greek mythology, is that like a really good mirror? Is that why it's so helpful?
I think you're right. It is a mirror of sorts. It's kind of a backwards mirror because you're having your experiences and then you can see them reflected in mythology. That's certainly true. That's the advantage of it. It gives you, what I'm saying, it gives you a poetic, by poetic, I don't mean writing poetry, I mean imagistic, artistic uh, way of reflecting on your experiences, like something to compare your experience to. But eventually, what you do, and this is true of those of us who work with mythology, we begin talking almost like the Greeks because we're so aware of how present that is. So I may say that one of my clients is being visited by Venus, the Roman goddess, compared to, similar to the Greek Aphrodite, um, is being visited by Venus. And now, at this point in his life, not relationship so much, but sexuality is really important.
Hmm.
And
Is
I'm
that the
going to
god of?
honor.
Is that Venus?
What's that?
Is Venus the god of sexuality,
Yeah,
sensuality?
in Rome. Yeah, I'm sorry. We mix these two up sometimes. We call it Mars instead of Aries and Venus instead of Aphrodite, but they're almost identical. Not quite, but almost identical. And some of the Roman words are a little easier.
Hmm.
So I would say then that, see, by, you see what I'm saying? By referring to, I'd say, oh, this
Yeah.
person now is being visited by Venus.
Yeah.
I don't mean that literally, and I'm not in that religion where I'm going to go to the temple
Yeah.
and make a sacrifice to Venus, but I am going to say that there's a potency, a power, a possibility in life that this person now is in touch with and
Yes.
being affected by. And so by being able to refer to mythology, I'm able to keep that larger potency and power of life in mind and relate it to the person's experience instead of making it all subjective in their own, all about their own life and their own emotions and their own history.
It gives them a
That's,
connection.
yeah, it gives you a bigger connection. And that is very fruitful. We
When you
call
talk
this
about,
archetypal psychology. That by what I'm doing, meaning that these images, these gods and goddesses, like archetypal images, they're
could,
bigger than individual.
could we talk about that? Could we talk about in the same way we're talking about Greek mythology, like Carl Jung with archetypes, him maybe and Freud, did they both create a list of archetypes that were, like we just talked about, a place to see your psyche reflected back to you, that kind of thing?
It's a little more subtle than that, but yeah. The thing is, Jung did say he taught that there are certain things that go on in a human life that are there because you're a human being. Like you fall in love with somebody, you're not the first person to do it. They don't broadcast it on the radio saying that oh, this person fell in love today. No, because everybody does, and
Yeah.
it's there as part of human life, and it's not just personal. It's not just individual, and you can study both the personal and the larger archetypal aspects of falling in love if you'd like. Look at it that way. That's what Jung did, and he did not come up with a list of archetypes because anything can be archetypal. You can. It's not just the gods and goddesses you can find. Like an astrology could be a way of being archetypal, thinking archetypally about your experiences. Or,
Like
of course,
when people talk about zodiac signs and stuff like that. That's what you're saying.
yeah, like your sign, your sun sign.
Yeah.
That's like an archetypal image for who you are. And it can be very useful. You can say, well, you know, it helps me to know that my sign is Libra. That's me. My sun sign is Libra. So it helps me understand my waffling over every decision I have to make. It helps me,
Yeah.
and it helps me know that I'm born to appreciate beauty. That's in art. That's helpful. So it's not fact, but it's a way of imagining, and
That's
so the
such a
archetypal way is good.
it's such an opposite approach from the way that my brain thinks. I think it's probably similar to the way a lot of people think, especially being raised in Western civilization, where we're in the search for truth and certainty and for sure, and the imagination has been shoot out faster than a stray cat, in a house. And
Yes,
but
yes,
it's really cool, man, because what I sense as we talk about this is that we're just trying different little snacks at the front door to try to bring the soul in, to tempt it to come in, and we will reach for imagination. We'll do whatever we need to put out there to bring the soul
constantly.
forth.
Constantly. You can use anything. Um, I can with people sometimes I read tea leaves, or even I read someone's cappuccino once, the froth on it. You can read it as for its images. And the person I remember I was in Scotland and I came out from giving a lecture and I was in a cafe and this person saw me and had heard the lecture and she said, "Would you please read my cappuccino?" No one had asked me that before, but I thought, why not? So I did a little short reading of her cappuccino. And she said, "This best thing happened in my life." She said,
Oh,
"Now I see things I hadn't seen before." So, and I think that's I think that's really good. That's the way we
Mm.
could read our world and read our lives constantly,
Mm.
using our imagination and trusting our imagination.
Yeah.
That's what archetypal psychology means. That's the psychology that I follow. It's not a psychology of archetypes, having a list of gods and goddesses or something. It's archetypal. It means this is how we work. We use anything as an image and try to expand our sense of what's happening in life.
What do you mean when you contrast archetype and archetypal?
Some people look at a list of archetypes. They think the archetypes are the Greek gods. And what you do is you try to match every human experience to a Greek god or goddess. And they
Mm-hmm.
usually take the goddess symbolically, meaning this god stands for love and this one stands for anger. It's not that. These gods have stories that are very complex. So if you study the mythology, you have a very rich uh, narrative in mind when you talk about the goddess Aphrodite. And it's not a simple matching of gods
Mm-hmm.
and their symbols. It's something much more rich and vast than that. So we do that with a great deal of study and 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 each of us tries to explore images archetypally, try to go into their depth and then connect them to human life.
Mm.
So it's, I think, a very rich, but it's not for us to hear someone, say, well, Venus is the goddess of sex, and she must have something to say about my sex, so I have to study this archetype. That's much too simple. It's
Mm.
much vaster than that and much more subtle.
The imagination portion of this is interesting because what comes up in my mind is that's how you engage with children is through imagination. And so
Totally.
it's so interesting that we disregard imagination as no longer useful in engaging with our souls as we age.
Well, the whole world of art is about that. That's pretty serious, pretty adult, the art world.
Yeah.
And therefore, the arts are very important in archetypal psychology,
Yeah.
or the soul psychology that I do.
Yeah.
I teach a course, by the way, every week called Soul Psychology, where I go over all this material. We'd have a different theme every week. So it's quite elaborate. It takes us a year to get through the basic themes.
Where can people find that, myself included?
You can find it on my website, thomasmoresoul.com. Thomas More Soul.
Is that like a live class that you do?
Yeah, it's a live class. Plus, I give short readings, and during the week we have we write emails to each other all week, and I participate in that. So it's kind of a community working on these archetypal themes.
Yeah. That's really wonderful. I have to say, honestly, this conversation has brought more to mind than I'm able to digest in the moment and speak to. I can feel my thoughts starting to get kind of clunked up. So
I
for
know
that,
we're getting to a point. I see that.
yeah. So for that, I have to bow to you and say thank you so much for this conversation together.
Yes, well, thank you. I have to tell you that I don't have a chance to talk so unstructured, about things, these things that are important to me, and I love talking about them. So things came up here in our conversation that never come up in others. So thank you.
Well, that's wonderful. Sincerely, thank you so much for your time.
Okay.
I hope to reconnect with you in the future when I've had more time to contemplate these things.
Yeah. Please do that.
Awesome.
Call me when you're ready.
Thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure you click the thumbs up, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel.